Hi, welcome to Sampath on Heidegger Session 4. Today we will resume our reading of Heidegger's Being in Time. We left off at Chapter 1, Introduction, Section 1, and we got through basically 2 paragraphs. So we'll pick up there and we'll do another paragraph today. I'll point out the page number and within the section. This is really just the beginnings the beginnings of the introduction, because over the next few sessions that will follow this one, we're going to move into Heidegger's initial attempt to talk about how history and our common conventions and everything we've inherited, all the entire tradition that we come from, at least in the Western context, what some of the assumptions, presuppositions are that we've always thought about being as something universal. It applies to everything. It's something that's completely indefinite because it can't be named and it can't be just reduced to one being or a being or an object. So it's so general, so universal, but at the same time, it seems very empty, undefinable. On the other hand, we can't deny it. So it's totally quote unquote self-evident. So he's going to work through those 3 assumptions: universality, undefinability, and the self-evident nature of being. So I'm just going to take a little bit of water, clear the throat, and then we can begin. But as I normally do, before I take the plunge into the text, Being in Time is a work that can completely envelop you. And it's not something you pick up and read for a little bit and put down. You just get lost in it, essentially. We opened up the first session with this question of who. Who are we? Who is speaking in this text? Who is the main character, this Dasein, being there, being in the world? And initially, Heidegger opened up these different dimensions. He talked about being with in general. So what is it with being, or with this question of the meaning of being? It's built into this entity to pose the question. The entity cares about it. Its most fundamental structure is to care about answering this question with this resiliency and resolve that's unmatched. It's highly singular and individual. No one can answer it for you. But it's fundamentally about being there in the world, being in the world. That's what we are. We're in the world. We're not in a cup of soup. We're not on another planet. We're not floating in space. We're not inside the sun burning at gazillions of degrees. We're in the world. So for Heidegger, it's not just a question of this being with, and then this entity Dasein. What is it with? Dasein with Dasein. Being oneself is not strictly yourself alone by yourself. You looking in the mirror, you trying to evoke your name, you trying to figure out how you live in this body, how you inherit this memory or tradition of what you are, how people perceive you, or as a sociologist like to say, you're not who you think you are, you're not what others think you are who you think others think you are, Durkheim. So it's not yourself, and you're certainly not only this, but you can be and drop into this possibility, the anonymous they, the oneness of humankind, everybody, all of us together, this one amorphous, anonymous everydayness that we are. You can't deny it. We don't just live a secret private life that's not disclosed to the rest of the world. Nor are we always public. We're not always running around on a stage lecturing constantly. We have a privacy and private dimension. But all these things have to be dissected. They're common intuitions and assumptions of what all this means. Heidegger's going to make this very unfamiliar. He's going to make it very strange. So your common connotations of what all this could possibly mean disappears. But, coming back to our reflections on what we're experiencing, our days are turning into weeks and weeks into months. The strangeness, the uncanniness of just walking outside and not seeing people. We're not used to that, especially in densely populated settings or urban settings. You think of those movies that we grew up with. Every few years, someone makes this kind of post-apocalyptic movie. Either an asteroid hits the Earth, or we're invaded by aliens. There's an initial invasion, decimation, and there's some hero, maybe counter-hero, anti-hero who emerges in the movie and is walking around, and it's just eeriness of seeing no one, and you're walking through obviously a world, a space that's supposed to be populated with people. Why would you have buildings? Why would you have facilities? Why would you have entities that is created precisely for people to be present, but they're not present? What is that feeling? Our days, as I said, it's as if the past is stretched out indefinitely. We're already there. Everything is bygone. Everything's past because we don't see anything. The future seems blanketed and empty. There's no content because there doesn't seem to be any hope. What can possibly emerge out of this nothingness, this anonymity of not seeing anything or anyone in a space that opens up for there to be beings and yet no beings appear? So the future is sort of like is this void that's so unusual for us because typically we're driven with this either anxiety or jubilation to rush into the future because we want to imagine this. Tomorrow I got to go do this. Oh yeah, we're looking forward to making this trip happen. And tomorrow we got to fly over to this conference. And then the present itself seems indefatigable. It's just you can't conquer it. It weighs on you. The depressing nature of this statistical accumulation. All we have in terms of our connections is through the internet to the outside world and through the media we receive. But the statistical accumulation is public. I said the public nature of death. The massification of death. And to think about this in terms of what's lost in the individuality, losing sight of the individual person or life that was lost and the whole world that goes with them and all the families that are permanently altered by the loss of life. You may know someone. You may know someone who knows someone that lost somebody. But it's not hard to assume that in one way or another, everybody's going to be affected because there seems to be this indefiniteness, this prolonging of this stretch of time when death is so public. We wonder about our anxiety. We wonder about why we feel the way we do, because that's what philosophy is about. It's not so much describing what we feel. Psychologists can do that and try to unpack its structures. Philosophy has to ask the big why question, a why that may not have an immediate answer. And we come up with analogies, Are we fearing death? Are we embracing it? Is it normalized as if it's an entity that's ever present now, englobing us? Are we being sucked into it? What happens to our own individuality? We all have our own peculiar sense of finitude, and Heidegger will discuss all this eventually, that nobody can take the place of your own death. You may sacrifice yourself for another. The bus is coming, your friend is there, and you push them out of the way, you save them, but then you get hit. So you're not literally taking that person's death, you're taking your own life and saving another. But there's no literal substitution. You can't go into that other person and take their death. They have to go through their death. But in this anonymity, this publicness, this dayness, of this both fear and anxiety and concern about individual preservation, which seems natural, it's built into natural evolution to survive, the will to survive. But this also sense of fear of loss of identity, as we move into this anonymous thing when we're kids, during a holiday of some kind, let's say it's Christmas, kids look forward to getting a gift. And whether they believe in Santa Claus or not, they usually await a gift that is singularly given to them. It's a particular toy that they want. Not everybody gets the same toy. If your siblings got the same toy, you'd be like, well, wait a minute, that's my toy. How come he or she got that toy too? But there's an individually customized giving of life that only is made for you. And kids get very upset if they see everybody else getting the same thing. And I use that as an analogy about this question of death. Because with the pandemic crisis, it's as if we're all being given the same thing, the same fate, the same ineluctable sense of doom because we're so helpless and there's nothing customized. So there's something about this anonymity that goes into this feeling of nausea and anxiety. We have to deconstruct all that. I gave you the analogy of the kid getting their gift, during the holidays, and this question of losing our sense of individuality and this mass kind of anxiety or fear of an unconquerable spread that can only culminate in one thing. So the news frightens us, the accumulation, the bumps in the curve, the experts telling us this, the politicians saying that, and yet we're trying to come to grips with this spatiality of ubiquitous death and why we need to take a step back. We need to take that step back because if we continue to plunge in this type of fear and anxiety, we won't survive. we'll be completely immersed in a state of hopelessness where we feel like we can't recover our sense of resolve to come back and be who we are and what we have to do, even through the crisis and beyond. And that's what we are as human beings. Time itself, you think of transpiration in time, expiration in time, aging in time, being in time, what Heidegger calls within timeness. But perhaps we need to destroy that conception and maybe even detemporalize death for a second. Our common intuition is to think about time and think about death and say, well, the reason we even fear time or experience time passing because we know we're heading towards something. Remember the movie? It's not a movie you can turn off. It's going to end. You can't rewind it. You can't stop it the moment before the end and permanently delay it. You can't survive your own death like others can to play the movie after you're gone. So we know we're heading towards something. We can't stop it. Hence our sense of mortality and finitude. But yet that evokes time in a certain way. It temporalizes time in a certain way, and we need to deconstruct that. It may not be natural. You may not have to think that way. You're going to say, well, that's all I know how to think. I see the death all around me. People are dying. And, eventually I'm going to die. So what do you mean detemporalize it? It's not like death is an object or thing, like a friend that's standing next to us and we're with. It's going to happen. And it's the very thing that I feel that allows me to even understand why there's something like time. The project of being in time, our reading of it, and things I want to develop, quite frankly, beyond the text about time and death, is going to require us to question everything, as I said. I have been saying this. So detemporalizing or detaching the time and the death kind of cohesion. And then even the mystery of other great philosophers have always tried to ask, in Heidegger's words can be constancy, ständig. What is this self that continues to constantly appear to me to me, and arises in every one of my experiences and moments? Freud can plumb the unconscious when we're asleep and think about all the structures of that, and other great psychoanalytic thinkers like Lacan. But when we're awake and we're conscious, you think, okay, well, myself is always with me. And it rises, as Kant says, in all my representations, but it's a mystery for him. What is that structure of replication and substance that keeps this thing together as it's, experiencing time as an intuition, not as a thing, and generating itself in every single, and when we see the manifold, we have to have some apperception of a unity of an I that allows us to even receive anything. But it's a mystery. It's not just like the spot on my elbow or whatever you're seeing right here. It's not inside me. And it's not a form I can fill out, the census. It's not my birth certificate. It's not interpolation, someone calling me, Raj, hey, how's it going? Oh, I'm calling, but it calls itself into existence through language, and I appear. Other philosophers like Derek Parfit, mystified by why we assume there's this constancy of self across time, that there could be maybe a disjunction between the future self and past selves and present selves in one stretch of life. He's not talking about reincarnation. He's talking about the whole stretch of life. These are all interesting, but they all presuppose, quite frankly, without anyone questioning, this past, present, future. Or if you think, like some traditions, that time is an illusion, it's something we have to generate, but it doesn't exist, and if we can achieve some transcendental consciousness through enlightenment or nirvana to overcome it, then we can reach this timeless self, this absolute self that's unaffected by time. We're not going to go down that path. As I mentioned, we're going to stay within being in time, because there, time becomes unified. It's the entire stretch of life, dilated. Past, present, and future are there. Their relationships are not apparent. Our internal time consciousness of how those things relate is not apparent. Trying to spatialize it is not apparent through calendars or a diary, a schedule. How can they all be there without allowing the present to dominate the other two? The presence of no longer through memory. Presence as anticipation of something to come through hope or desire. Tomorrow we're going to go on that trip, so you can envision it, future. Yesterday we went to the store. Past. Present tends to dominate both the others, not give them voice. But imagine going into a space where it's not the present that dominates, and the other two are there equiprimordially, and one arising out of the other. And something you can't spatialize. When we get to that ecstatic sense of time as something primordial and unified and finite, as in the sense that it's not this infinite flow of sequences and moments that kind of goes on indefinitely, we'll be in the depths of division 2. And as mentioned, we're really only in the first paragraph of section 1 of chapter 1 of the introduction, which has 2 chapters, and the 500-page work has 83 sections. So we're in the first 2 paragraphs of section 1 of 83 sections that fill up this whole work. So let's turn to where we left off. Keep in the background everything I said about our normal intuitions about anxiety and the relationships between time and death, and the mass anonymity of it, the example of the kid wanting their own singular conception or experience and just losing that. And if that's the basis as to why people feel the way they do. And then overcoming these kind of analogies and metaphors because they can't apply. A child receiving a gift is not the same thing as trying to have, as an adult, an individual conception of what your whole life will have meant. As in someone wraps up in a nice bow the meaning of your life in one moment, in the recording of your life as to what it all will have meant after you're long gone. The analogies break down. And I try to come up with these examples just to show that there's a compulsion in us that drives us towards an individuality, which could be based on an illusion. So we left off on, this is Robinson Macquarie, 1962, Harper Row, page 21, introduction, exposition of the question of the meaning of being. And last time we did the first 2 paragraphs, we talked about how Heidegger said the ancient Greeks, Plato and Aristotle in particular, started this thing, but then what they opened up and were perplexed by is something we're no longer perplexed by. We can't just resume or repeat what they said. Quite frankly, what they said, it appeared to them in a certain way. It's not something that's been recovered. All of what they started just sort of has been reworked over time, culminating in Hegel, which he's, at this juncture, obviously very dismissive of in the sense that he includes him in the entire tradition of which he's a culmination. And again, he's going to encounter him, but we'll let Heidegger off the hook for now. But once we get to actual Hegel and his reading of it and actual passages in Hegel's works, you're going to see that Heidegger collides with something that he can't handle. And quite frankly, we're living through the legacy of that because no one's really kind of unpacked or redid the reading in a way that not only gives Hegel his due, but takes us into this division 3 while passing through Hegel. We're stuck, in other words, with Heidegger's critique of Hegel, Heidegger's attempt to separate his project and subsequently from Hegel, and something that is unthinkable, which would be the beyond of Hegel. What comes after Hegel that no one's really articulated in 2 centuries. Sounds arrogant, bombastic, but that's the claim. So now the question is, how do we defend it? I've jumped to the very end of the book, so let me come back to the beginning. So we're going to read this last sentence on page 21 and for the whole paragraph at the top of 22, and that's where we're going to stop today. So we're not even going to finish section 1, which, as I said, is going to lead to 3 points he's going to make. Being the most universal, being undefinable, ineffable maybe, yet self-evident, because it's about as evident as you thinking you're here right now, or you drinking a glass of water when you're drinking a glass of water. That's going to emerge in future recordings and sessions. We're going to have to spend maybe 2 or 3 recordings just to get through those 3 different points. Prior to that, what is he saying? What's the paragraph? Prior to the articulation of those 3 points. It says, at the beginning of our investigation, it is not possible to give a detailed account of the presuppositions and prejudices which are constantly reimplanting and fostering the belief that an inquiry into being is unnecessary. They are rooted in ancient ontology itself. And it will not be possible to interpret that ontology adequately until the question of being has been clarified and answered and taken as a clue. At least if we are to have regard for the soil from which the basic ontological concepts developed, and if we are to see whether the categories have been demonstrated in a way that is appropriate and complete. We shall therefore carry the discussion of these presuppositions only to the point at which the necessity for restating the question about the meaning of being becomes plain. There are three such presuppositions, excuse me. Okay, sorry if that was a bit choppy because the light is bouncing off the page here to work the Zoom lighting with the outside light. And I'm not an expert in this, so that's why I'm having a hard time seeing the actual text. I'm going to repeat it, so we're going to have to go line by line anyway. But, here he is trying to embark on stating at the very beginning, why are we going to be posing this question of the meaning of being? All the presuppositions out there as to what we can possibly mean by the undertaking, the ontological project, ontology raising the question of being, but not just raising the question of being, what is being, and then trying to answer it. He's thinking about the question of the meaning of being and the meaning of the question. And they're not, reciprocally defined in any way. And it's not circular either. The meaning of the question is just as paramount as the question of the meaning of being. And meaning and being aren't the same. And the meaning of being is not being. And all those presuppositions through history, the soil, as he said, from which it arose, the ancient Greeks, whatever was a mystery for them, and why. This really interesting historical accident. Posing being in terms of logos, word, reason, truth, or even a deeper sense than propositional truth, is unconcealment, aletheia, revealedness, disclosure, phenomenon, something that appears as such for what it is without appearing as such to be anything specific or particular. It's disclosure, it's clearing, it's revealing. Being speaks and has to come to us as truth. But we have to ask about the truth of being, the meaning of being. And we can't assume anything, even the human being. Human being's relationship to being, human being as a being, all these things they have histories and traditions and ways and philosophies and philosophers that can talk about it, but you don't need to take any of that for granted. You can question. That's the whole point of philosophy. You have to question. You can say, oh yeah, I know, this is what this philosopher said about human being, and this is how I feel. And Heidegger wants to turn this back against, and we have to come back to this, make plain again, because it's been buried, and we just take things for granted. Okay, don't talk about being. Well, this project is ridiculous. Why am I doing these recordings? You're wasting everybody's time. Or we have to resume. We have to recover. We have to feel the freshness of the soil as if something is growing again, emerging for the first time. It can't be a first time because there's already an origin. Those are the ancient Greeks. We're not taking the tree out of its roots and it's dead because it's been derooted, and then replanting it, resurrecting it, so to speak. Not taking new seeds and creating a new tree. Because we want to question even that sense of past. Pastness is some kind of temporal structure in history where we may have either a familiarity because we think we're descendants. Think about your own family tree. You've descended from, your grandparents and great-grandparents. Your parents have told you about your lineage. We descend from something, so we must have some inherent linear connection to even the past. That's why we're familiar with it. You can look at pictures of older relatives who've passed away, and someone tells you, "Oh wow, you sort of resemble your grandpa or your grandma, or this person or this aunt or uncle or something." So you think there's a connection. If you completely detach the past, so it becomes completely unfamiliar, one can come up with the analogy of maybe amnesia. Those movies you see where someone really literally wakes up, they have absolutely no idea who they are and no memory of anything. Therefore, they can't have any memory of any family history or any past relatives that they might have been familiar with. And you show them a picture like, hey, they have no idea. You show them a picture of themselves, they have no idea who they are. So how are they going to know whether that's their parent or that's their grandparents, etc. So continuity or pure discontinuity, both are impossible. The relationship to something that never had an original presence to begin with, because if it was fully there and present, there wouldn't be a distinction between past and present. If it was fully distinct, incomprehensible, totally other, it'd be trying to read a language that you can't read. Remember, I said I can't read Chinese and I can't understand it. So we're beyond this discontinuity and continuity. The resuscitation of the question of the meaning of being, where meaning doesn't signify, and being is not a being, it's not an entity, it's not an object of our intuition, imagination, sense, and experience. It's not a perception of something we have. It's not me looking at myself now during this recording, and this is going to sound strange. It's not even this book. You think I'm reading from a book and I'm interpreting a book, I'm trying to comment on it, but we bothered to ask what's even there? And there as there is not either here or now, hikanook, but the fact that we're thrown in, stretched, projected way beyond everything that we are, and being pulled like that tidal wave with what's that called in the ocean when in the evening when the water comes on and then it just recedes back in. In any case, when the water pushes back out, if you don't leave, you're going to get pulled in with it. So you get kind of pulled into the future, stretched out from that past. That's coming along with you. It's not like leaving the train station and going to the store. What if the train station came with you as you're walking to the store? Think about that. So temporalizing time in any normal register and trying to create relationships between being and being in time and being as time and occurring as time, whiling, occurring, transpiring. Normally all these registers would descend on us. It's not too soon to start talking about the time component, even at this stage when he's saying, how are we going to make plain this meaning of being, this question of the meaning of being? He's going to struggle through the whole work and his whole life and career to make plain, and many will say he never did, and some will say that's impossible. Because if you turn being into something else, you're just going to reproduce some other major paradigm or concept of what it was, or what this philosopher said, or what this religion says, and that's not what the mystery is about. It's not about relativism either, and pure individuality. Like out of your own individual self, you're just going to come up with something brand new. I think we talked about that in a previous session. There may be a desire to do that. It's beautiful to see artists do it. So when we say, oh, that's a totally original artist. Wow, no one's ever done that before. It's a certain kind of musician that you like, or maybe a certain director in filmmaking, or a writer or an author. Like, oh, wow, before people talk about David Foster Wallace, I haven't read him. It'd be embarrassing to admit that, but oh, wow, he's such an original style and writer, and he did something new. Okay, so that's the appreciation of the artist, but that's not philosophy, at least for me. And it's certainly not the project of being in time and fundamental ontology. The compulsion inside being to persist in what it is, harbor the possibility of disclosing what it is, as if meaning could be a packet or a unit of the quantum of essence that's built into being to have that potentiality for it to reveal itself. But again, not as the internal anatomy of something. We all have bodies, and at least they say we have an anatomy, skeletal structure inside, and strung together by our muscles and nerves and the flow of blood and pumping of oxygen. And so you can't think of that kind of internal structure inside being, but without which one can say, well, if there was no being, then we wouldn't exist. If Earth didn't have the perfect balance of, atmosphere and water, for sure, no water, no life, no us. So that's the physical realm. But being, to even go back and say, and this is Heidegger, say that we need to make plain again. In its deepest mystery, why there is probably nothing more important than this undertaking to ask about this question of human being, instead of assuming that nobody cares about it. Because we don't care right now, because we're so busy caring about other things. If we don't come back to this question and care about it for Heidegger, then what are we? Truly, who are we and what are we? Who is it that humans, men, say I am? The gospel. And in the New Testament, for example, countless examples in the Gospels. Not that Jesus is trying to be cryptic, or as the theologians and scholars say, and there's, at least in the Gospel of Mark, for example, there are 4 Gospels, but in that Gospel, there's something about the kind of cryptic or secret nature of his consciousness, of the Messianic consciousness, forgiveness of who he is and what he thinks he is in relationship to others. You know, he's not playing games, and he's not purposely trying to deceive people or fool them. How are you able to do those miracles? You know, who's working through you? You know, this guy's able to cast out demons, but maybe it's because he is a demon that he's able to work with them. How can demons cast out demons? You know, he's not answering who he is. And it's not his name either, or his birth. He's born in Bethlehem. He grew up in Nazareth. Jesus in Nazareth. Oh, what good could come out of Nazareth? Or, you know, all those predicates: I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and the resurrection. Trying to reduce those predicates, those subject-predicate relationships, to have a simple conception of his being. Well, he's a human being. Well, yeah, obviously. He's not an elephant or donkey. That doesn't get into this structure of the possibility of the relationality of what is being disclosed and how he's present. And when 2 or 3 are there and gathered, I am there. Gather in my name, I am there. So the being there, again, we're using that as an analogy because we don't want to collapse that particular type of religion and other religions that we can explore with the text. All we're saying today, roughly, is that being as time cannot make time a being. Being can have tenses that language has to manufacture. So we can build out tenses from being. I was, I am, I will be. Temporalizing being, asking about the being of time, asking about the relationship, and how is this going to all turn out in a way that what's actually being revealed is an undisclosed, heretofore undisclosed sense of what is radically other, even to that original beginning, in which the Greeks posed being and time, and explored the mysteries of time, the distinction between time and timelessness, motion and rest, origin and end. And how is it that these mysteries can come to human reason? How is it that our mind is temporalized? You know, why do we have this arrangement where we can only anticipate the future and remember the past? Just remembering the future. Don't want to get into physics. We talked about that. Reversibility of time and relativity of time frames and Einsteinian cosmology and general relativity. Very interesting stuff. Great stuff. Love it. Don't get me wrong. I really love it. But that doesn't help me in terms of this philosophical quest. So to reiterate, try to deepen a bit in his text, the soil from which all of this emerged, the contemporaneity of his time, which we can say is our time too. He's 1927, we're 2020, but this opacity, the fog, the opacity around all of our assumptions regarding this task of posing the question. One can then ask, from where does the question come? Is the question prepackaged? Like the gift to the kid? Is it being fashioned? Are we, as time, like a factory is to the creation of a product? Are we being made with the composition of time to be something as such. The meaning of being, if we go back to the table of contents, I'm not trying to skip from the section I want to stick to, which was that first paragraph. Remember part one? The interpretation of Dasein, being there being. I know I'm in my fourth session, and I haven't really introduced the term Dasein purposely because keep it as it is, and then you can do whatever you want with your translations, but just here, even in the English translation at this juncture in the table of contents, there's no translation of it, but the interpretation of Dasein in terms of temporality and the explication of time as a transcendental horizon for the question of being. Let's say there's some circularity there. No way to talk about Dasein unless we talk about temporality. No way to talk about temporality if you're just going to have recourse to linear time and your normal intuitions of past, present, and future, or if you think you're a being in time. Transcendental horizon is not the sky or the horizon within which you exist to occur as such, but it's the upper limit or boundary that's going to delimit what we can actually do. Human beings can't fly on their own. They can fly in a plane, maybe put the jetpack on, but there are certain things that you can't do. So by nature, something is going to delimit this entire project. It's going to turn out that time is that horizon for the understanding of this question of being. That's good news in a way, because prior to Heidegger, you can say, there's Hegel, he's going to have his own way into being in time, quite frankly, in his phenomenology and his science of logic, but we'll leave him there for a second. With Heidegger, that's good news to say that, oh, wow, the question of being is not going to be posed in a vacuum. It's not acontextual, just sort of magically appears. And that the fact of the matter is that if the question of being is going to evoke the mystery of time, and the mystery of time is who we are, projected beyond our finitude to even ask the question of the transcendently, infinitely rich mystery of the finite, which is what we are. Remember, we're not the timeless, immortal God or myth. We're very real. And all of this is real. The experience of being a human being, it can't be more real than that. It can't be more joyful and mysterious. Hence our feeling about this, the bereavement, the sense of loss, the mourning, when people die, and what we're going through. It's a very strange feeling. It's very uncanny. I wonder sometimes in this mystery of being, without assuming any meaning to being, but you can ask some fundamental questions even here at the outset. Have we asked, not the mystery, the equal mystery of just the fact that we exist, the fact that the earth started and became as life evolved and we evolved, and here we are. Or why there are others. How come we haven't been visited by other aliens, for example, or another species that may have a whole other way to reveal the truth to us and have a level of intelligence that we ourselves can't even possibly match right now. And even our best computers and or whatever, our geniuses, smartest scientists and people. Imagine something so beyond that, infinitely beyond, qualitatively different. So I'm not talking about, that kind of like, why are we here on Earth and what are we doing and how do we come about and what's going to happen to us? But the sheer, utter strangeness of not only why we are this way as opposed to many possible worlds, why this one, and if this in fact is the best, as other philosophers have asked, but why we're thrown into this mystery of asking the question. Because one can assume, remember all those presuppositions? Many assumptions can descend on us. Well, because we're endowed with intelligence and consciousness, and unlike others, we're going to think about the animal too. And we don't want to think of the animal as inferior or lacking some kind of philosophical ability to pose the question. Maybe they can pose the question of the meaning of being too. Maybe they are. Maybe they're doing it in a way that we can't even possibly fathom. Who knows? Maybe they're laughing at us. We think we dominate them. They're the ultimate horizon for alterity, as to, again, suspending everything we've been taught to think about the distinction between ourselves and them. Or Aristotle, the metaphysician's an animal or a god, but definitely not a human. Surging past any simple notion of the mystery of us and built into us to transcend that in the quest, the limit, striving, and Nietzsche's willing, but not willing nothingness, which is where he ended up, and not willing the truth as it's been manufactured through history and given to us, but the truth emerging. Revelation. Being prepared throughout history for that one moment to occur. Theologically, that's the eschaton. But then what takes the place of the eschaton? For ontology, for philosophy, not theology. Eschaton, Greek, last time or last days, many of the Abrahamic faiths, in radically different ways, but in the monotheism, there's an expectation of the end. But that's temporalized in a linear way. That literally is not the past, although the prophecy of that was past, temporalized in its own complex way, but it's really this expectation of what a lot of people believe. The conspiracies, the stuff you see, these are the last days, and you can see the plagues and this and that, and Armageddon, etc. So we're not going down that path. But we have to ask why we're occurring. If we just wake up, and even in the home sheltering and the remote work, we're so busy. People have to take care of kids. People have to maybe take care of an elder parent. People may have to do their normal work in the office online. They're meeting with their colleagues. And if you say, well, wait a minute, I actually think that I'm not here. I cannot possibly be occurring as such, all those things I just mentioned. I am other than the being that is doing that right now. And if I was that other, then it's sheer luck in a way and contingency that I have manifested as such during the course of the day to be X, Y, and Z and do X, Y, and Z, and the conflation of my being and my doing, as if all my being is what I do. No, but there's something other that's there. And you're going to say, hey, wait a minute, come on, are you talking about some kind of poltergeist or some paranormal stuff, the supernatural? Are you talking about, well, there's someone else with me? Or are you talking about psychosis? Are you talking about psychopathology? Are you talking about, remember, we said Dasein is not multiple personality disorders, like there are many, many types of persons. You could feel that way sometimes when we're, really struggling to manage everything, and you feel like, oh my gosh, what is it? You feel fragmented. You wish for this, you feel fulfilled about that. You're being tested in a way because you want to be different, and you're stuck being this self, and yet it seems like this other self is asking to be otherwise. No, we're not talking about this disunity and entropic sort of dispersion of selfhood. But there is a deep anxiety that, wow, I am really me. Not even looking in the mirror and say, hey, is that me? I'm really this person or this entity, and yet I'm not. And it's not because I'm trying to deny who I am, but I'm perplexed as to how I am there without being this being that's being called upon in everydayness and in time, because that's how things are measured, like the recording, 11:31. And it can't just be for nothing. You can say, well, not all of us have a fate. It's so odd. Take any history, for example. How come that person arose in 1960 or 1980 or 2008? And when they were 2 or 3, nobody knew who they were except their parents. And of all the people that were born at the same time, how come they became president, and now they're permanently etched and immortalized in a narrative Who are they? What are they? Why are they? And what could be substituted? And you can say, well, that's just the gamble of history. Come on, there's nothing predestined. And the beauty of at least a democratic system is that it's egalitarian, and anybody can emerge in a democracy and become the president. Really? And yet it's that configuration and that choice that we have to live with, especially if we're extremely dissatisfied with a certain choice. But it's that uncanniness, that Unheimlichkeit, which is being completely, totally, and absolutely unfamiliar, that stirs us in our alterity about ourselves. When for a moment the space clears and something appears in a totally different way, in a way that can shake us to our foundations and say, wake up. Using the metaphor of waking up. Right now, you're literally asleep. We've got to wake the person up, wake up, and sense that everything that is not what it is, and that it has to be other. And this is the propulsion underneath that is responsible for that disclosure. So the soil, in many respects, is the mystery of this question of being, how to re-relate to that, how to suspend ourselves in a type of transcendence that takes us so beyond all beings and draws us in, and maybe we pass through. That's the temporality of the passage. It's a very strange event. It's not passing in time like we are doing now. It's not the pictographical representation of death. The stories about the near-death experience. Death flatlined, the medical witnesses are there, flatlined, physical, medical, biologically defined death. Person, and something miraculously comes back to life. Oh, I was approaching a light and I saw things. What are those presupposes? Imagination and witnessing and saying and something, in narrative. So you can't go with that. Or, you don't need something that fantastic. Okay, you hear about the old stories and myths that they say when you're dying or at death, especially the moment before death, everything, your entire life flashes. All the sequences and the moments of your life flash. You get to see everything from that being. You get to see the movie. But the last scene is you dying. And again, there's no moment after that, so you can't see that. You can't come back from the near death and say, hey, yeah, this is what, and everything. It's all that clarity of the entire stretch of life, all in that one moment. But even that needs to be deconstructed. Because what if life isn't a sequence of moments? There's only one moment. And how all those different moments get super synthesized into one whole structure, one totality. I'm going to explore this totality of the being of Dasein rooted in this mysterious temporality. So it can't be that sequence of moments. Oh, I was 13, I did this, and I went to college, and then grad school, I got married this time. The sequence of moments and the relationship between time and moments. And time is hyperextended, maybe a different type of time. It's hyperextended as one big moment dilating, is not the same thing as a sequence of moments. So if that's possible, think about this. A whole nother sense of being in time and death. If that's all possible, then what we think all those things are now is not the only possibility. Wow, that's really weird. I'm tempted to go into the parallel universe. Our universe isn't the only one. There's another one out there, and everything that was and everything that is and everything that will be is already there. So this present is my past in another universe, or this present is my future in another universe. My past in this universe is the present in another universe. You can keep on slicing. Past goes into present and future. Future goes into present and past. Present goes to past and future. All occurring. Not the physicists play with that. They got their equations and they can speculate, and they're all tending towards this super unification. They think they're tending towards some sense of dark energy in the string theory, and that there's a quantum mechanics and general relativity come together. And the most fantastic possibility that there can be, they're pluriverse, plural universe, multiverse, plural universes, and everything that is, was, and to come is already there and occurring. So you in the future is occurring somewhere else. You in the past is occurring somewhere else. And you in the present, obviously, that's the dimension you have. Just like all we think of in classical Newtonian mechanics is length, width, height. I'm in this room. But that's not how the larger cosmos works with relativity, Einstein's model. You get those three plus time attached to it, and all kinds of strange things happen in the presence of gravity. And a weird phenomenon like the black hole. That's certainly not how things are on our Earth, or the wormhole, or the passage to another entity, entry point into another space. And the fact that the universe is not even bounded in the way we think it is. So we're tempted to go down to that physical space and realm, and it's mysterious to us. Of course, it's fun to think about that because, quite frankly, it's boring just sitting in this room. I'd rather know what it's like to go into the black hole, like Matthew McConaughey's role in Interstellar. That seems pretty cool if you can survive it. That's all our analogy. So religion is out there, and that's very tempting to us to go plumb the mysteries of religion, the messianic, the divinity, the relationship to history, the covenant given by Yahweh to the Jewish people and the Exodus, the beauty of that prophetic quest for justice. Nothing more beautiful, if you ask me. If you think about the mystery of Christianity, it has its own kind of miraculously interesting and compelling way of drawing you into a story, the greatest story ever told, the most famous person in human history, and the life he led and why it took that form. Didn't take any other form. There aren't a billion gospels. There are a billion gospels, but they're not canonized as the four. There aren't a billion. There's like 20 or 30, the Gnostic gospels. But we have those four, and they have some pattern of events that all four tell regarding this guy's life. Attached to some very strange statements about him and very strange things he says. So religion, science, why philosophy? In many respects, that's going to be our quest. Our quest with Heidegger in these times, only times we know because this is we're co-present to this present, right? Even in this recording. In these times, we have to ask again the question of the meaning of being, but in a way that is heretofore undisclosed and has never been articulated as such. What the book tries to accomplish has already been written down. What the billions of interpretations attempt is what it is too. And I've said from the very first time, very first recording, although we're reading it from beginning to end, in my mind, maybe there's a little secret that I have to divulge. What's actually driving me is to read it from the end to the beginning. I'm going to do it in a linear way. I'm going to go from beginning to end, but in my mind, I'm already trying to think of that end and start there because I'm trying to pass into another realm beyond the text by repeating when I'm going inside the beginning of the text to the end. And Hegel has some interesting things to say. Oh yeah, the beginning, the end is latent in the beginning. It just remains to be actualized. What? And then go beyond any kind of spatial configuration between beginning and end. Because Alphabeam is going beyond the synthesis, negating any differences between them, raising it to another conception that's higher, negating that negation or difference, raising and conceptualizing and appearing and occurring. He's got a super synthetical movement event in the heart of his enterprise, which in his own way is going to turn out to be time too, but for Heidegger in a different way. So that's a lot to take in, but the simple point is we have to ask again this question of the meaning of being in this moment of urgency and exigency, the hysteria. That's how we opened our session today, our reflections on the historical present. There are things that can motivate us to experience what we're experiencing right now in certain ways, certain possibilities. Either we're choosing or they're being forced on us to experience whatever we're experiencing in very specific ways, or things can be otherwise. The most immediate thing that we can say from a moral calculus perspective is we want to stop this virus. We need to stop the deaths. People die naturally, it's one thing. Accidents or tragedies, unforeseeable accidents, those are different types of death. This death, I'm pretty sure, unless some psychopath out there is enjoying the fact that this virus exists, people are dying. Most of us, all of us, want to see this virus stopped and this type of dying and death to not happen. That is understood. That is unquestionable. Raising the question of meaning of being is prior to that sensibility to understand that something could be disclosed to us right now that we haven't articulated. It's very, very hard to keep all of this there, being there, with all these other terms descending on it. Dasein interpreted in terms of temporality. It's, quite frankly, not just its temporality, it's not time that it possesses, but as temporality. Temporality is not linear time, it's timing, timeliness, and its ecstatic nature. It's what it's going to be rooted in, quite frankly. And care is not care for chocolate or I care about, watching the Super Bowl tomorrow. It's the ultimate concern for the ultimate question of the meaning of being built into that entity in terms of time. The horizon for understanding the question is going to be time. But again, time is not what the physicists say it is. And if we take the New Testament, the chronological moment, this is the hour for which I was sent. Galatians, when the time was fulfilled, God sent his son. Judas asking Jesus, when the woman said, putting oil on his feet, we can use that for the poor. What are we doing? Why are you using the precious oil? The poor will always be with us. She's preparing my burial. No one has any clue what's to come in the story, at least at that moment. What's he talking about? What's his relationship to time? Did his death, preordained into the structure of the narrative, come before? The scene we watch when we watch the movie or read the Gospels, the death comes at the end, it doesn't come at the beginning. Something's going on there, time being a death. It's a mystery that can draw one in. And theologically expound its complexity. But we're not going to go there. Physics and religion, we said that. But we got to keep all this together. And it's going to get deeper and more complex. And I keep using this word scary. I don't mean like a scary movie. I'm certainly not trying to scare people, but this uncanniness, this weirdness, this strangeness, this unsettling quality, Dasein, temporality, horizon, understanding of being, question the meaning of being, presuppositions, what happened to the soil? And what do we have to suspend to even go in there? So you got to be prepared. You're going to go into space. Don't you have to have all that equipment so you can breathe and do whatever you're going to do? You can't just leave the Earth and, as is, like Superman, and just fly out there. So now, obviously, we have to be prepared. We got to put on our suit and be prepared to handle this type of complexity. So I believe we're coming up on our hour. Thank you for joining us today. This will be Sampath on Heidegger session 4. And I look forward to our next session. Thank you.